everyone. It's Dolly. I'm here with Roger, who I had a wonderful evening about 2 weeks ago at the Levitt Pavilion. Roger has very talented grandfather, who Roger will tell you more about. So, hi, Roger. Thank you for coming forward.
My pleasure, Dolly. It's nice to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
And you live right nearby in Westport, so
I do.
I wanted you to tell everybody a little bit about your grandfather and how this serendipity thing happened.
Sure.
Okay, so tell everyone.
Sure, I'd be happy to. My grandfather was a ragtime composer from the era when John Philip Sousa brought ragtime into popularity around the turn of the century, and around the period around 1910 to 1930 was the ragtime period. Ragtime was a very upbeat and less structured music than the march music of John Philip Sousa. It added a little bit more fun and syncopation to a very structured style.
And people could dance to it.
And they could dance to it. That's exactly correct. The difference is the syncopation and the addition of a little fanciness in the right hand on the piano made march music of the period from 1880 to 1910 a little more fun, and people felt that swing feel to it. It was pre-swing swing music is what it was.
Right, so they did the one-step.
They did the one-step, and actually Mel Kaufman is been labeled as the king of the one-step because his songs were that much easier to dance to than the march music that preceded it.
So they had this impeccable orchestra come from Maryland, and the name of it was Peacherine?
Right. There's an orchestra from Annapolis, Maryland, headed up by a young man named Andrew Green, called Peacherine Ragtime Society Orchestra. And Andrew is a marvelous collector of the music from 1880 to the 1930 period. He has about 10,000 pieces in his collection.
And he's just a young man, too.
He is, and he's extremely passionate and has been studying ragtime since he was 14. I believe he told me that he first discovered the music of Mel Kaufman when he was 16 or 17 years old. There was a song called More Candy that he heard that he thought was captured his interest. And as he delved into a little deeper, he became enamored with Kaufman's music of that period. And he began to build an orchestra to perform ragtime because he's a piano player. But he found that the ragtime music in general didn't really stimulate him in the same way that the Kaufman music did. He didn't label it Kaufmanic. I labeled it Kaufmanic, but it was more fun, a little bit more spirited, and the right hand and the melodic use of taking melodies against the rhythm that was in the left hand on the piano.
You could see that Roger's a musician
different.
from the way he's talking. So tell us how you, by chance, found Andrew Green and your grandfather's music.
I'm a working musician in the Fairfield County area, and I was doing a New Orleans band for a local club in Connecticut, and had been asked to put together an evening of New Orleans music. So knowing full well that New Orleans was the melting pot for all kinds of truly American music forms, including blues, including Dixieland, including rock and roll and rhythm and blues, I wanted to delve a little deeper and see what the ragtime relationship was, in addition to Dixieland and all the other things that were the obviosities of New Orleans music.
So did you know much about your grandfather's music at the time?
I knew a little bit about it. I thought I knew a lot about it, but I learned later on that I didn't really know that much about it. But I was aware of his music because my grandfather died when 16 years before I was born. So although I never met him, I knew my grandmother well, and I learned about my grandfather through my relationship with my grandmother. She was a piano player and did shows for the service people and put on talent shows and things at her apartment in the West Side in Manhattan. I remember going there as a child and seeing his sheet music up on the wall and hearing about Mel Kaufman from my grandmother May. And didn't think much of it, but as a young boy, I heard lots of it on cartoons like Tom and Jerry and Warner Brothers' Merry Melodies, and every time there was a cat and mouse chase, I would hear this song called Meow.
Yeah, that Meow. Should we play a little of it?
Yeah, we could play a little of it, sure.
Let's play a little Meow.
I think it's cut 25 on there is the instrumental of Meow. You may remember this from your childhood out there, listeners.
The night that I heard the concert, they were doing it with the vocal.
Yes, they did a vocal. I'm not sure they did the instrumental as well as the vocal, but I think they did the vocal, yeah.
So listen to how this happened, folks, how Roger walked right into this without even realizing it by looking at the internet. So tell us about that.
Well, I was, as I said, trying to find out about New Orleans music in advance of doing this performance for a nightclub in Connecticut. And I Googled and searched New Orleans music and put into it Ragtime and also my grandfather's name. And when I did that, up came two orchestras that were listed as performing and on YouTube with music of my grandfather's that they were performing all over the country, which I had no idea about and I had no knowledge of. So I contacted one of the orchestras immediately to ask them where they were playing and to introduce myself. And the fellow told me he was playing at the Westport Country Playhouse.
And that's where you're from.
And where I live. And I said, well, that's interesting. You mean you're telling me you're playing my grandfather's music right there and under my nose and I'm not aware of it. And I realized I really had to look into this deeper, that there must be more going on than that. And sure enough, he explained to me that his friend, who had another orchestra, was a specialist in Mel Kaufman's music, and that I should contact him. So I emailed this fellow, Andrew Green, and contacted him in Maryland, and he was delighted to hear from me because he had spent the last couple of years researching, collecting, archiving, and transcribing all of Mel Kaufman's music, and it was his favorite music. And we became fast friends on the internet. And then he came up to New York and spent the day with me and asked me if I would like to see where my grandfather was buried. He took me to my grandfather's grave where my grandmother was, which I had no idea. I hadn't been there since 1961. And it opened up to me a relationship that has been a marvelous thing for our family, for Andrew, for his orchestra, and for people that enjoy this kind of music.
Such a nice story.
Yeah.
It's a real story. So then you put together a CD. Oh,
Well, Andrew was hard at work compiling all this music, and with my help in giving him historical background on the life of Mel Kaufman and verifying certain facts about his early life and where he lived and his collaborations with different companies and so forth. He gained momentum in this project to put together a CD and a compilation of all of Mel's music, which included not only published works that had already been recorded, but also Andrew found a half a dozen or more works that had never been recorded, unpublished works that were only in sheet music and had never been put, in front of people's ears.
So what are some of the famous, well-known pieces that he did? Because they played them that night in Westport.
The better-known ones are songs called Taxi and More Candy, Umbrellas to Mend, and Pick a Chicken. Pick a Chicken is a particular favorite of mine in that the lyrics are written by my grandmother, which I never knew, and I found out through Andrew Green. And later on, I recorded a song called Chicken Pickin', which had nothing to do with it, but had something to do with the DNA. We like animal music.
So what is ragtime music then?
Well, ragtime music was the outgrowth of the John Philip Sousa march music from the late 19th century. It didn't really begin until somebody got creative with the march music of John Philip Sousa. And what I mean by that is that in the piano player world, you have your left hand doing bass lines where you're playing roots and fifths and roots and fourths, and you have your right hand playing melodies. And that's what happens in piano playing. So what happened in ragtime, different than the march music, is that the structure of the music, which was very metered in the left hand, took off as people got creative with their right hand and used a little syncopation and a little feel sideways to do something a little different than the structure and rigidity of the march music.
So they got into the Scott Joplin.
Yeah,
At that time.
and Joplin got a hold of it, and the New Orleans thing got a hold of it, and you had this incubation of all these styles of music that took the roots of ragtime, which was march music of Sousa, and made it much more interesting. And it became a little more danceable. And even Scott Joplin, I think the quotation is that he felt this swing experience of getting loose and feeling something. It made people want to move.
Right, it does.
It makes you want to move. This is not unheard of. This is what happens when you feel like dancing.
Right.
So this is what happened around the turn of the century, is that march music, which was pretty rigid and pretty metered in the left hand, but nice.
Nice.
But band music, after you hear it for about 20 minutes, you're ready for something different. A lot of people. So that's exactly how ragtime, the whole ragtime field developed, is out of that march music.
And after ragtime, it went into jazz. Did it sort of move into jazz, American jazz?
It did. The precursor of jazz was exactly what ragtime is. Somebody at some point in ragtime said, this swings, but I want to play a little bit more of what I feel. And they took a solo. And that's what jazz was. They added improvisation to the melodic looseness of the right hand in the piano with the rigidity and the metric rhythm and structure that the left hand has. And so this is what happened. Boogie Woogie was another movement altogether on top of it, and swing and Dixieland.
Wow,
but,
rich.
Yeah, it's the American history is rich with these music art forms that are all ours. These are not from Kenya, and they're not from Japan, and they're not from Scandinavia. This is American music.
That's terrific.
It is.
So do you want to play and listen a little bit to that Taxi song that was so much fun that night?
I think that would be great, because Mel, like other ragtime composers and other Tin Pan Alley people and theater people, they were New Yorkers, and getting a taxi in New York was key.
Right. So, Dave, can you find that? Do you know what track it is? The Taxi music? I mean, they sang it at the concert.
It's number 6. He wrote the song about Taxi because for band leaders to sell music in the ragtime period, there was no recorded music. You couldn't buy it to hear it. You had to buy the sheet music.
It's amazing.
So they had to have inventive titles and catchy, wonderful artwork, and that's what Mel Kaufman had.
To sell their music.
Yeah.
Or get a chance to play it for someone to listen to
It's got to look good enough to buy before you could even hear it. Well, I grew up in Weston here, not too far from where PKN is. And I have been a rhythm and blues lover and performer for the last 4 decades locally here, and have spent the last 15 years or so putting together a company called Old School Music, which is a production and performance company dedicated to the performance of older music. And our branding is sort of built around the idea that it's not necessarily today's music, but it is music that we believe in, which is harmonically interesting, melodically interesting, and rhythmically interesting.
So tell me a little bit more now in detail about this old school music. Like, what is it exactly that you're doing?
Well, we're
Folk?
doing mostly rhythm and blues music, soul music and rhythm and blues from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And we feature vocalists from performing acts such as the Tower of Power and the Blues Brothers and Steely Dan and so forth. And we have a band called Old School Review, which has been playing locally here and doing shows at the Fairfield Theater and the Levitt Pavilion and in New York since the mid-1980s, and more specifically, actively since around 2005.
You know, it's said that you've played the Levitt Pavilion about 20 times or something like that. I was reading something recently.
Right. I'm not sure it's really that many, but it's up there.
So you've been they only put acts on that are pretty darn good, especially now.
Well, they've done a fantastic job of making, what makes Westport, honestly.
But they invite everybody. There's people there from everywhere.
They have a wide variety of live performance acts, and they have, attracted a really nice audience and given the local communities
50 nights.
Fantastic, 50 free concerts a year for 35 years.
I know, it's amazing. It's now they have redone the facility, so now it's just a beautiful, exquisite place to go.
Sure,
and people figured that out, so there's 1,000 people.
I've been involved in trying to appreciate and pay homage to the great music of the past 30, 40 years, and thought that I was, doing a pretty good job of doing that, of old school music. Until recently, when I rediscovered my grandfather's music.
It's good.
100 years ago.
But you're doing both now.
Yeah, it's a full schedule of events.
And you told me you're also connected to a project at the Smithsonian, which is another, exciting, fabulous thing.
It is. We're trying to help the Smithsonian to preserve Memphis soul music, which is an area that they have not really done a big job on, that they're interested in. So we're having some good conversations with them about that. I
saw the musical just recently, which showed some of the black-white music coming together for the first time, and how the music worked, but how the segregation was still a big issue.
Sure. Well,
it
is an amazing piece of American history that there was a point where black and white people could not eat together nor go to school together, but in Memphis they could play music together, and they did.
I was alive during a lot of that, so yes. I remember the whole thing. It's amazing.
As was I, and people like Steve Cropper and Booker T. Jones are the people we're talking about, and who are involved in the project, and it's a wonderful thing to try and make that part of preserve that for American history.
Thank you so much for answering my email, and letting me find you.
Let's hear the other side of Mel's stuff. He's very varied. There's a wonderful ballad that this great singer Bill Edwards does called Magnolia Bloom. We can hear the softer, more sentimental side of what Mel does.
So if you want to get in touch with Roger Kaufman, he's in Westport.
You can reach me at oldschoolmusicproductions.com. That's easy. Happy to talk to you about anything you're interested in musically.
Great, okay.
Magnolia Bloom.
Long have been the dark days of waiting, your promised return. How the gleam of moon pale magnolia now makes my heart yearn, my heart ache and longing will all forgotten be. When the bloom of dew starred magnolia brings you with the springtime,